educate them on what's right, what's wrong, and tell them that same message. No is the answer. This is a safety-sensitive position, and you're trusted to go into people's homes. You're trusted.
Welcome to the Triple P Podcast, premier, professional, and proactive, brought to you by the Ohio Fire Chiefs Association. I'm your host, Clayton O'Brien, and I'm the fire chief for the city of Oregon.
Another very hot topic in our fire service today as we talk about the medical and recreational marijuana. Recently, changes in the law and how it does affect your firefighters. How does it affect your staff and everybody in there? We'll do the exact same thing that we did before. We'll kind of do a little introduction of who the panelists are that you're going to be hearing from today. I know, and then I want them to talk a little bit about what committees that they're on, so then that way, if you are interested in learning more or being on the forefront of helping whatever the change is or to forecast what's coming, then well in the know right from the very beginning. So we'll start right to my left with retired Chief Jack Roop.
Good morning, everybody, and welcome. I chair the Safety, Health, and Wellness Committee, and I guess, take on that role, we went back to about 2015, and I was on the foundation board, and the foundation and the board came together to look at both organizations and said, you know, what are we missing? What other services can we best provide to our members? And I happened to be the one that said, well, I don't think we have a health and safety committee, and I think we should have one. And so that was, I think, in May, and in October I went on the board, and they said, guess what? You get to chair the health and safety committee. But we've been really active, and one of the things that we have done is that we have spearheaded a good relationship with the Ohio professional firefighters and the Ohio state firefighters. We worked on cancer legislation with them, and we're able to get that through. We've done mental health with them, and this became a topic that they're as equally concerned about as we are. And so, you know, moving forward, our effort between the two organizations, and we'll extend it out to the Ohio state firefighters, is that we deliver the same message and the same caution and risk about the use of medical marijuana, CBD oils, and recreational marijuana.
Good points, meeting with John Harvey. We met with John Harvey last week, which was phenomenal. I'm Rick Vober. I think most of you have at least seen me. I'm on a number of different committees, including I'm the chair of the Metro Committee. I do sit on the Health and Safety Committee. We've done some peer support stuff, Education Committee. I'm probably one of the folks that's on darn near every committee, and I think the reason I do that is I like to be involved, for one, but I also like to know what's going on so that I have a better idea to do better my job back for Akron as the deputy chief. So as far as the panel stuff and getting into the marijuana, as Jack said, this has been a significant concern of ours. With the CBD oil originally, medical marijuana, as those cards came out, and some of the things that happen around the country. So it's really important for us to stay on top of this, and we'll kind of get into it in a few minutes, but thanks for coming back.
Good morning, Steve Agenbrode from the Clear Creek Fire District. Currently is the chair of the Legislative Committee, and I'm also a member of the Policy Committee and the Marketing Committee.
All right, thank you. This one is actually completely different than workforce development. Now you get them in the door, and now they want to, maybe, do they want to smoke marijuana? And is it allowed? I think was that last week?
Yeah.
Okay, last week we went down and did the podcast with the OAPFF to try to get this general message of what it is for the firefighters. We know that they have the direct connection with all the union officials and where we all sit on what it is with the medical or recreational marijuana, or CBD, or gummies, or any of those other things that, you know, that are affecting our service and our young population as it sits today. So we're going to tap the panel, and I'll get us kicked off, and then again I'll put the QR code up there for the questions. But let's start off with the risk associated with it. As we know that we all see that, you know, what's marijuana, and when we were kids we always heard, well, it's just that's the gateway drug to the next thing. But wonder if it's not now the gateway drug, it's just a drug that I use. What are the risks associated with if I am in the fire service and using or wanting to partake in that because you can't control what I do on my days off? How does that affect us?
Well, I was going to say that the risk is three, maybe even fourfold. First, I would think the risk is, you know, if the department, and most departments probably have a drug-free workplace, And so, the first risk is the discipline and the loss of the job. I think what a lot of firefighters don't realize is the other risks associated with it is if you're injured. Workers' comp has what they call a presumption rebuttal. And I think it originally came out in 2008, and that's a statement where if you're injured and you test positive with alcohol or marijuana, that you can have your claim disallowed. And so I think that a lot of people don't realize that. And one of the things that we've seen, when we've been doing this is we've looked at some of the arbitrations and firefighters that got bound up in arbitrations because, they were tested and came back with a positive THC in their blood. And they really thought they were doing the right thing. They may have been using it for a headache or pain or something like that as another alternative because other medication, they were beyond that period and they were still having those issues. And so they sought out CBD oils or a CBD product that they thought was safe. And, we did a webinar with some attorneys, and what they pointed out was CBDs are not created equal. There's not the same process that they go through, and they thought they were safe. But it ended up that they tested positive even after they thought they had purchased a safe product.
Some of the discussion points that have come up in the recent past, with New York, they decided that they were no longer going to test for random or for employment, FDNY, for drugs, for alcohol, for medical marijuana or recreational marijuana. And they went away from it. And the purpose was they didn't want to deal with the fallback of the state of New York allowing recreational marijuana. And that's kind of where we are here in Ohio. And we've seen it in different states, in Colorado and Washington and a number of others, where they have allowed recreational marijuana to come in. And I think the answer, at least from our perspective and from the fire chief's perspective, is it doesn't matter. You're in a safety-sensitive position. You have to stay away from it. But, the prescription card is going to be a question mark for me. There's been a lot of discussion. I think we're going to get into the scheduling of marijuana, and it's currently a Schedule 1, which means there's no medicinal benefits. It's likely to move to a Schedule 3, which means there are benefits for it. And then federally, it changes a lot of stuff. You have to have a prescription, and then, how do you get it? And then how can you deny somebody using it? So there's a lot of concerns with that, and I think for us in Ohio currently, having strong policy, contract language, CBA language, and a city policy or a township policy that protects you as a fire chief and your organization from liabilities, because there are liabilities. Of course, we all know that when it comes to somebody smoking marijuana.
Well, I think there's a lot of misconceptions about the medical marijuana card. Right now, because it's Schedule 1, it's illegal, and there is no prescription for it. When it changes to Schedule 3, which it seems that it's going to do, then there can be a prescription for it. But right now, the best that a physician can do is, write out a recommendation for the use of medical marijuana, which a lot of people view as being a prescription.
And I think the prescription does make like you said, that's going to be an issue, because why can I be prescribed Dilaudid or fentanyl or any other narcotic and be able to take that, but I can't be medical marijuana because it's supposed to help me? So we talked a little bit about those risks, but what about the risk on the changes with the line of duty death benefits or the other benefits that we've talked about in the past?
Well, the line of duty death benefits, the public safety officer benefits, that act, it changed in 2022, they updated that act. They actually, in the descriptions, talk about all classifications or all scheduling of all medication. They concentrate on Schedule 1, which is marijuana, and again, they presume, just like workers' comp presumes, if the body tests positive, and they look at I would say, they look at the levels to determine if they're going to end up and approve those line of duty death benefits or they're not. They go as far as they also then recognize Schedule 2 through 5. And they then, at that point, they look at what the therapeutic levels are, and they establish the therapeutic levels. So if it's Dilaudid or whatever it is, that if it's over the therapeutic level, then they end up and you have to go back and decide, was this a direct result of that injury or that death? So, I mean, it's even more detailed than what the Bureau of Workers' Comp has. And Bureau of Workers' Comp, one of the questions that we sent to the Bureau of Workers' Comp was, with recreational marijuana, what's going to change as far as injured workers? And they said nothing. So that presumptive piece that they have in that notification is it's going to remain. They're going to end up and treat recreational marijuana, medical marijuana, CBD oils, just like they do with alcohol.
It's a good point you bring up with the levels. And I remember reading in Boston 2007, 2 firefighters were killed in a restaurant fire. And those firefighters tested, one positive for alcohol in his system and one positive for cocaine in his system. And they both lost their benefits to their family. And I think that's the way that Bureau of Workers' Comp is going to be looking at things, is if you test positive right now and for whatever reason something bad happens, you're going to lose those benefits and your family's going to lose the benefits. So I think it's important to understand that. And when we look at testing and how testing is affected, the urine tests that we do now, or the blood tests we do now, has a pretty large window. The best test that they're suggesting now is the oral swabs, and we're not there yet. They're suggesting that maybe they can narrow that down to 5 days, and you have to have 2 labs that will confirm that test, and we don't have those 2 labs just yet. There's other things that are out there, but right now the best answer is our folks need to stay away from it. And the concern I have is when the legislation passed, if you all remember seeing the articles in the paper and things coming out, recreational marijuana is here and everybody's looking, where can I buy? I had firefighters having that same conversation. So I can have, 6 plants per adult in my house, that's 12 plants, and where can I buy my seeds? And it's like, whoa, slow down, fella. You don't want to get into that just yet. The answer is no. It's a safety-sensitive position. So for the fire service, nothing has changed.
I was going to say it's interesting because yesterday that we talked about it, and Jonathan Downs was here and he said no. He was very clear that we should not allow it in the fire service. And so when we were with the Ohio Association of Professional Firefighters last week, they had 2 attorneys that came in from the Toledo area, and just the same message. They said absolutely not, no. And those were union attorneys that were saying that to union members in their summit.
And I'm just trying to play devil's advocate. And I want to talk about the testing a little bit. When you talk about the alcohol, so with that being said, when you talked about testing, there's a huge gamble, because there's a huge gamble if this test could go back 5 days. I mean, and they could have used it 5 days ago, and whether they're still actually under the influence of marijuana at that time of when the event happened. Hey, they used marijuana, or is it a level like alcohol that you do a breathalyzer and you meet a certain criteria or threshold? Well,
it depends. From my understanding of it, I don't know all that much about it. I've read a little bit about it, but I know the testing is concerning, and how they do the testing and when it shows up. So you're driving a fire truck, you get in an accident, and you had a gummy yesterday or a week ago, and all of a sudden that gummy's showing a fairly high level because it's a synthetic.
Right.
It's a Delta 8, and that's an unknown for us. And what does that do to you, and what does it do to your body? I think there's a lot of literature that talks about CBD oils, the CBD stuff does not affect your driving because you're not high from a CBD oil that you rub on your shoulder. The difference is if it's got more than that 0.3 of THC in the system, it's going to pop you hot on a test. And now you have to have a third party decide what's going to happen with you and your career, and the impact that it's going to have not only on the community and how they look at you as the fire department and you as a city or township, but all of that is going to change if you have somebody that shows up high and strikes a family with a fire truck on the way to a call. And even if they weren't high, it doesn't matter if their levels show that. So it's a real concern with the CBD oil and the testing, and it's really a gamble. I know in Canada they're looking at a THC breathalyzer, and they really think that this is going to tell if you're high at the same time. If you have the THC in your lungs, it'll show that you have levels in your system, and once that goes away, you're not high, and according to them. So I think there is some other stuff coming. It's going to be a while before we see it here in the United States, but right now there's a very large window, and the liability is even larger for us.
Well, go ahead, John.
I was going to say that one of the things that, and the positive side of the oral swab is that it's going to end up and narrow that window, down to possibly 24 hours. The issue is right now is it's going to take 2 laboratories in the United States to end up and look at the handling process of it and the testing process of it, so that final outcome is certifiable. And they don't have 2 labs in the United States to set this standard at this point, and that's got to go in front of the Federal Drug Commission.
Well, last week when we were with John Harvey, one of the biggest things that he was telling his members, and I think it was a really good point, we used it a lot during that time, was why would you want your fate of your fire service to sit in the decision of a third party? And that's the message that they continue to say is, just don't do it, because you might just have the fate put in somebody else's hands. I then turned to where I talked about that line of duty death, not doing an autopsy report.
Right now, I mean, if you don't have to do an autopsy report, and what I understand, and I had not been able to actually confirm it, it was an understanding that in a lot of the line of duty death applications that they don't necessarily submit an autopsy report. And before, the autopsy report always had a drug test associated with it. So there may be a loophole, I don't know, but if a piece of documentation, you as a department, have a line of duty death, and that's part of your policy that, you would end up and have that done, and it gets submitted, then there's certainly that opportunity that the Public Safety Officers Act would prohibit that benefit.
When doing research on your testing, obviously the gold standard would be a breathalyzer or something like that. But in law enforcement, they do a field sobriety test on somebody they suspect of being an impaired driver. Have you come across anything like that where there's a way to test that way?
No, they talk about, testing for impairment, and they would do the same thing, other than there is an eye exam that they do that would make it a little bit different from alcohol. But, the presumption for even, with an injury, the presumption of workers' comp is that if you test positive, you're impaired, and you got to prove that you weren't impaired.
I think one of the things that we've had discussion about before is intoxication, and what does that mean, and how do you tell that? And having spoken with some departments up in Canada, 2018, all of Canada went recreational marijuana, and now it's the state flower or the province flower up there, and a lot of the police agencies allow their members to use marijuana recreationally on the weekend. And when questioned, because I questioned some of their folks that I talked to, because they bounced me around, they didn't want to share their policy with me because they don't have the same laws that we do here in the United States. But one of the things that they said is an intoxication. When your folks show up to work, they have to be ready to work, and they can't be intoxicated in any way, whether that's on marijuana, that's on alcohol, or any other drug. So for them, that's how they set the standard. As long as they're coming to work and they're appropriately ready for work, there is no issue. If they come to work and they're not ready for work, that's when they have problems. And they wouldn't share all the details of what happens at that point. But those types of policies do concern me and the fire service and how it worked out. So 2018 isn't that long ago, and already now large organizations in Canada allow the recreational. I'm not saying that's where we're going here in Ohio, but it is something that we need to pay attention to.
So we did get a question in from the audience. Are all CBD oils safe, no THC? If not, how do we guide an employee who may be directed by a physician to use this CBD oil for their injuries or health issues?
Well, as Kelly Babcock, who was the attorney that we had on a webinar in October, she said that CBD oils are not created equal because of the fact that, that each of the companies that are ending up and extracting the THC, there's not a standard that says you have to extract that THC from the hemp plant or the marijuana plant. So there is differences. And so the best thing that we can say is that you would look for a product that is classified as an isolate. And the isolate says that it's gone through some testing, and that the extraction of the THC then puts it below that 0.03. But there's also been cases, that went through arbitration that we've seen where a firefighter thought they had an isolate and tested positive because it was over that 0.03.
And most of those the organizations that have these companies that have the CBD oil, and you see them online, they have a third-party vendor that gives you those test results, and it'll say, you click on this, and it'll take you and show you what it was made from. The problem is there's no real federal oversight.
Right.
And not having that oversight, there's no really any regulation on how they do the process, where they get their hemp or marijuana from, and so those levels are not really known. They say it has to be below 0.03, 0.3%, but that doesn't mean that's what it ends up as, even if third-party vendor says, oh yeah, don't worry about it, it's okay to use, and then you pop positive. Or it's a synthetic form that they don't know about, and now you don't know what you're putting in your body.
Does it affect them as a part-time or volunteer at your organization?
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It's a safety-sensitive position.
Right.
And I think we have the trust of the public, and we have the trust of the public because of the things that we've done in the past. So making sure that your policies are set, making sure that if you have contracts, make sure that language is set, make sure your folks have been trained, educate them on what's right, what's wrong, and tell them that same message. No is the answer. This is a safety-sensitive position, and you're trusted to go into people's homes. You're trusted that you are not high when you're pushing medications on somebody. So
I think you talk about collective bargaining and policies. You need to make certain that your policy is comparable to your collective bargaining agreement, because if your policy is less than what the collective bargaining agreement is going to trump your policy.
Yeah, and in the eyes of the law or workers' compensation, a firefighter is a firefighter. Whether you're a 36-hour volunteer, level 2 career, you're classified as a firefighter.
Yeah, and so it really doesn't matter. You got a certification that says you're an EMT or a firefighter. You're in that safety-sensitive position where we don't want the trust to lose the trust of what the public believes in us. Coming there, being high, and then expecting to be able to deliver a service to them. In the event of the BWC where they deny the claim, who becomes responsible for the bills?
Well, that would probably come back to whatever their insurance company or their provider is through the department would probably pick it up. But I would certainly, what we've talked about is in that case, once that they decide that, hey, wait a minute, this is work related and we're no part of this, it may be a struggle to find out who is going to take care of those costs. And the first thing is that, they're going to end up and have to go through that rebuttal process with BWC to say I was not impaired and bring in justification that workers or, they were fine in the morning and those kind of things to say that they weren't impaired based upon that.
Yeah, that's going to unlock a whole bunch of doors.
Oh, yeah.
Because now you're going to have to do a disciplinary action.
Right.
You're going to have to do an investigation. This person may actually lose their job, and then they lose their job. Insurance says, okay, yeah, we covered them when they were employed, but they're not anymore, and this was work-related. It really is a whole web of mess.
And then to the point of, are they still your employee? And if they're still your employee, who is responsible for them? But if they're not your employee anymore, then, now they don't have the insurance. And they weren't under the influence when it's there.
Well, one of the things, too, is that, with alcohol, it's water soluble. So it's easier to test the way that through that testing process. Marijuana, CBD oil, THC, it's fat soluble. And so it hangs around. That's the reason it hangs around for that extended time period. And so, you can end up, and in some cases, if you take a hair sample, 30 days, from a hair sample, can still test positive or show the traces of THC in them.
We got another question that came in. Being on the legislative committee, and we notice that sometimes things just work really, really slow. The question here is, how long will it be before the legislator sorts out the issue and we will be able to have clear guidance on how to proceed?
Based on the current General Assembly? Never.
Yeah.
No, it's going to take a long time. And the thing about it is it's an ever-evolving process. Once you write a law, it doesn't mean it's going to be there forever. It just means it's the current law that we follow today. Nothing's to say, it won't change down the road. So, I mean, this is something that we're going to have to continuously monitor for a long time, and getting direction from the General Assembly right now, I would rely on your local law director.
It's going to be a moving target for quite a period of time.
Especially with the possible changes with the Department of Justice and moving it to a Schedule 3. The literature that is out there now currently suggests that if they're requesting it, Department of Justice will most likely allow that change. So, which can be alarming, especially when we're in the issues we're having with our state legislature and making some decisions. We could be dealing with the federal law prior to us having answers on the state law that's already in effect.
Yeah, the attorneys I've talked to on both sides, as you kind of said earlier, Jack, it is that they're advising their clients to not change anything. You are the employer. You are allowed to make work rules. If you currently have a zero tolerance policy, we're going to advise you to maintain your zero tolerance policy, and then none of these things we're talking about will be an issue from an employer perspective, other than you'll be, if they test positive, you'll have to go through the disciplinary process just like you would have before it was legalized. So that's the advice they're giving. But think about, lawyers are risk managers, and they don't want any risk for their client, so they're going to give you that advice. But we live in the real world where you have to lead, not just, avoid all risk. So that's just why this is such a slippery slope.
If it goes to that Schedule 3, thing that comes to my mind, I don't know if I'm just putting you on the spot here, but if it's Schedule 3, you think about, you can't even go to the mall or any gas station or any walk down the street without just smelling marijuana like crazy. So is the Schedule 3 going to be in smoke this, or will you think it's going to be more of like a pill or gummy form or something of that nature?
No idea. I think in looking at what's going on around the state, and I know I've talked to some fire chiefs in the audience who have said, it wouldn't bother me so much if it were a gummy or a pill, but when it's smokable,
yeah,
it now impacts me a little bit more as a citizen. And I think I don't have a good answer for that, but I do have concern with when they have the ability to get a prescription. That's when you're going to get that firefighter that shows up and says, well, my doctor gave me this prescription and I have been smoking this marijuana for the last 30 days. Now I've popped positive. This is a Schedule 3 drug. So what do you do? And that's why I think you're right. Policy has to be strong and it has to be in effect.
And essentially what will happen is, this is just my opinion, take that for what it's worth. The legislature won't cure this. This will be solved in the judiciary, where someone's going to sue somebody and then there'll be case law established.
Right.
I mean, that's essentially like a lot of things. It's hard stuff. The legislatures don't want to touch it because there's too many dissenting views. Is, like you said, Rick, one of your employees either is going to test positive and then come and say, well, I have a prescription, or they're going to, come in and say, I just got this prescription from my doctor. It's no different than Zoloft or any other medicine that I've taken in the past. You have to let me use it. And then that's, unfortunately, if that's you, you're the unlucky one, and the rest of us are the lucky ones because you have to fight, and we'll live with whatever happens to you. But that's, in my opinion, how this is ultimately going to play out.
Which is why I bring up the whole fact of whether you're smoking it or taking a gummy, because it does affect the people around you. They're asking, is there any data on how secondhand smoke? So, getting a contact buzz, being around somebody that's actually smoking it.
Yeah.
Jack, I don't think you got high when we were.
Yeah. No.
Go ahead.
Testing. No, I don't know. I mean,
Weren't you?
that's always been a question. Is there a contact high in that?
Yeah.
And I don't know if there's any research out there to prove it one way or another.
I think what they have said, I know on the testing end of things, the levels are so low. That they're not going to show up as THC in your system. But I think one thing I don't want to I want to make sure we talk about a little bit is how your employee, one of your firefighters, got to the point where they were looking at CBD oil or gummies or marijuana. It's because of the other issues that are going on, PTSD, injuries, illness, and I think plug for the peer support stuff that's going on right now across the state. We brought in a couple $100,000 from the feds to get peer support out there. We need to get people from all of your organizations to be peer supporters and take these free classes so that they can recognize when there's an issue. And I think part of the concern that we had many years ago when we started talking about this peer support is making sure that our people are taken care of. And we want them to retire happy and healthy, and we want them to be good employees. So you have to have somebody on that peer support side that may recognize that. So when somebody falls down and gets hurt and blows out a shoulder or whatever, you have conversations about, hey, how are things going? Is everything good? You know, if you're starting to have some issues to where you're thinking about that CBD oil, maybe there's something else. Maybe there's somebody else you can see. Addiction is a problem in our fire service. Suicide is a problem in our fire service. And we have to address those issues head on. And I think bringing up the peer support is a piece of it. But I think making sure that our folks understand that there are other options out there. CBD, marijuana is not the answer that we want you to have. And I know there's a lot of literature on the PTSD to be using LSD. I know there's an article recently about a Detroit firefighter that had a TBI from a vehicle accident, couldn't get back to work, and they tested him out on some LSD over a period of time, and he was able to actually bring it back together, and he's back on the job. And that's great, but that's in a controlled environment. We don't want folks going outside of that controlled environment and practicing unsafe things. So I think, you know, just a plug for the peer support stuff, this is important. Please make sure you get your folks into that.
And again, go back to, you know, workers' comp. And workers' comp was very clear with us that, you know, when they came down with their recommendations about how they were going to deal with medical marijuana, they have no intent on changing it, you know, as it goes forward. And that was one of the questions we asked. If it gets deregulated to a Schedule 3, will that change? And they had no intent for it to change. So I think that, you know, and I think one of the things as you look to different states too, is that Ohio is one of the few states that has a government-regulated Bureau of Workers' Comp. So it's one entity. A lot of states end up, and I think Pennsylvania is one of them, that you buy it like you buy insurance and you shop for workers' comp insurance, and that's how the departments provide workers' comp. And so you'll see in some of those states that don't have government-regulated workers' comp, you'll start to see language starting to trickle into collective bargaining agreements to try to end up and meet with whatever the department's policy is. I know that the attorneys that came from Toledo, they had a couple pieces of language out of two collective bargaining agreements in Illinois. And I don't know if Illinois is one of those, you know, where you shop the insurance for your workers' comp or whether it's legislated.
Yeah, I'd like to add a little bit to Rick's comment earlier about the research currently being done, not just with medical marijuana, but psychedelics in general. You mentioned LSD, but there's a bunch of different psychedelics that they're doing research on specific to post-traumatic stress. And that, I think, will be the real challenge for us as employers is, our attorneys, again, being risk managers, are going to say no. But we have employees that need us to help them. And if the research is clear that actually you have an employee that has an issue and marijuana can help them, or it's been proven that psychedelics can help them, well, that's really outside of our normal box of thinking. That's going to be a tough choice to make. You know, is if you're a workers' comp, you're a law director, or even your city manager, township administrators pushing no, makes sense. But your employee is saying, I need this to get better. Do you have to make them choose to lose the career they love to get better? That's coming down the road because there is a lot of research, and the preliminary results are it's extremely effective to help people with post-traumatic stress and other issues like that.
I'm going to step back just 1 second. We talked a lot about the policies, and we talked a lot about, you know, contract language. Or where can individuals that may be sitting out in the audience that may not have a policy in place?
I think Lexipol is probably the best. Opportunity for most in the audience. It's available to everybody. We do have, working with Ohio Fire Chiefs Association, there's a discount through Lexipol using the Ohio Fire Chiefs to get it. But then having conversations with other agencies. If you're a small agency, talk to the largest agency around you. Most likely they will share their policies with you. I've never had an issue with sharing policy from Akron with anybody on anything around the state. That being said, of course, there's record retention policies and public records requests and all of that stuff, but having that conversation with other agencies to see where they're at and just determine where is your policy? Do you have a policy? Is it strong? What would you recommend? Jonathan Downs was a great person to talk to about some of that stuff. So perhaps hiring an attorney. I think the lady, Kelly Babcock, when she came in, their organization also does that kind of work as well. So there's a number of places you can get that policy. So it may cost you a little bit of money if you don't have the ability to do it in-house.
When we talked to John, talked about contract languages and maybe if they're seeing a lot of, the potential of the changing. What John talked about was we may potentially see the request or changing if it pertains to testing. Is there anything to elaborate on that?
Well, I think what he talked about in terms of testing, that he felt it was important, and it would be part of either policy or the collective bargaining agreement, that the union, the local, and management would agree what that testing process would, that they would identify a lab and agree to this is a lab, here's the process, and going forward. And that way, as they had an issue, both the local and the department had clear direction as to how that they were going to proceed, with that and the testing, and be comfortable with the results of that testing.
I think looking at Cincinnati's arbitration is really helpful in that regard as well.
Yeah.
So there are some policies out there that were written because of arbitrations that have gone through. So I think.
Yeah, that's a great point. If you're not familiar, there was a arbitration out of the City of Cincinnati Fire Department where the arbitrator ruled in the city's favor. If you want to get more information, you can read that. Essentially, what it boils down to is the arbitrator ruled for the city because the city had solid policies and the employee clearly violated them.
When we talk about the peer support, the resiliency training, I just want to point out that, if you do listen to the podcast, if you do get online, we'll have a link there. So you'll be able to quickly on the link. There'll be two links. One will be for the peer support resilience. The other one is actually the link for the OAPFF support, the individual that may be having an issue within your organization. I think we have to talk about what are we doing to educate our employees that, A, marijuana is not acceptable. Number two is, what about those employees that are injured, and then maybe it's not even marijuana we're talking about, that they're being addicted to some other type of medication, narcotic, or prescription drug that kind of drove them down this lane where now they're trying to buy whatever they can buy, wherever they can get it. So there's some support, there will be some support links for that as well.
Well, I was going to say, one of the things we spent a little bit of time talking about was identification of those individuals in the workforce. And of course, as management, as the leadership, a lot of times, you don't have that connection with them necessarily, particularly in a larger organization that somebody's having an issue. And it comes back to, we need to do something maybe with the education of company officers and that. And we even went as far as to say is probably the first person would recognize that there's an issue with somebody is that informal leader in that crew or in that department or in that station, because that informal leader is the one that's, preparing meals with them or checking equipment with them or those kind of things, and just realize that Joe or John is not acting right, can see a big difference because they're the ones that are with them. And so, those are the people that we thought that, as we identify directions to go and education to get out there, is that, we can talk about, working with the officers and the understanding in that, but the first person that probably has that clue is that informal leader. And hopefully it's a positive informal leader in the organization, because we know we can end up and have non-positive informal leaders in the organization.
Not their dealer?
They are our employees, and we do need to, take a supportive approach. And we talked a lot about that before, is taking a supportive approach. We got to make sure they're educated to fully know that there's zero tolerance. One of the audience just put in there, if you already know that you have a zero tolerance policy, is it beneficial to make sure it's reiterated in their CBA?
Absolutely, and having strong language about what's the process and how do things go. When things go bad and somebody has an issue, they test positive, what is the process to work through, whether it's leading somebody to termination or leading somebody to get help, or both, depending on how the outcome goes. Just having that strong process in not only the language for the CBA, but in your policies, and make sure they match.
Yeah, I was going to say one of the things was we were looking at arbitrations. What the direction that arbitration went was based upon procedure. If they had good procedure and good policy, then the arbitration usually went in the favor of, the entity.
Taking that supportive or educational makes it where the employee might feel comfortable because we talk about the times of when an employee has a problem. If they come to you first and identify that they have a problem compared to they wreck the fire truck and have a problem, we have two largely different ways of how that's going to be handled.
Absolutely. Somebody steps forward and says, hey, I'm having a problem. I saw, a kid, whatever, and it's messed me up for a long time, and steps forward and I need help. I'm addicted to whatever it is. It's better to come forward and talk about that. And again, getting back to the peer support, that's why we need peer support in our fire stations around the state to make sure they have somebody to go and talk to about this, because it's very difficult for some a firefighter or a lieutenant or a captain to go and talk to the fire chief about, hey, I'm having problems. And even more so, it's more difficult for that fire chief to go back and then talk to his peer supporter who might be a firefighter. So, a shout out to Brad and what he's been doing with the chief officer peer support stuff and what he's working through. Getting chief officers as peer supporters around the state will give us outlets as well. But asking for that help up front really relieves the issue from that side, because we can send them to get help.
Is it easier to talk to your fire chief or the firefighter just because of how the word travels so fast in the fire service?
Well, I think with a trained peer supporter, that conversation, and we got that piece in legislation, that it's confidential. So they're bound to keep that conversation to themselves and direct that individual. If they don't do that, then they're not taking and doing their part as a peer supporter.
One of the things that John said from the OAPFF is in that link, you could pick a peer support too, or maybe a contact. So that contact could either be somebody within your department, or it could be somebody across the state. You could select which area maybe that you would want to talk to somebody. So it doesn't have to be somebody that's local, which I know that some of us may feel that way, that if we did want to talk about it, you might want to just talk about to somebody you don't know. I do want to go over here to Chief Shaw. Do you want to, let's get Shaw, put him on the spot here to talk about the peer support on the chief level, since this is mainly the audience that, we're speaking to.
I haven't had enough coffee yet.
You got to stand.
Come on, you can talk. We all know that.
Yeah, thank you. So we've kind of been on pause for a little bit while a lot of the training's been rolling out, and we're coming to that point where I think we're ready to start getting our group together. But let me be clear on what our group is. We are not standing up a peer support team for chief officers for the state of Ohio. We're standing up a network. So I sent out a survey to our core group a couple of weeks ago, looking to garner in information from the individuals who are interested in being peer supporters, not just for chiefs, but in general, and then finding out if they're already affiliated with the local teams. We are going to build a network. So chiefs across the state in every region, like for example with Chief Vober up in the Akron area, he's in tune with his local resources, with his local teams. So if he reaches out and said, hey, Brad, I need somebody to come up and help in our area to work with Chief so-and-so for a little while, I can help them and talk them through some of the initial steps in getting them on a road, on a path, but I'm not the one can say, in the Akron area, this is what's available to you. I mean, we all have the blanket things about the Center for Excellence and SAL, but that's not where the rubber meets the road as part of your behavioral health journey, right? You got to have your local resources available to you. But in our setting from the Ohio Fire Chiefs Association, providing a group across the state that allows us to pinpoint for two things. One being, if you as a chief need somebody to talk to, we'll have somebody in every region that you can at least get on the phone with. Or we'll come and see you. Or if you want to talk outside the region, we'll have that available to you. But it didn't make sense for us to stand up a team, have our own provider, do our own training, where you should be doing that locally and being in touch with your boots on the ground in your area. That just vicariously works to our benefit. The other part is having these chiefs on this group that provide you resources for when you have one of your firefighters says, I have a problem, and you've never dealt with it, and what do I do? What are some best practices that I can work through? And there are documents for that as well, but as far as the life experience that we get dealing with some of our firefighters that send a text to somebody across the bunk room and says, I can't do it anymore, and then that's reported. Well, then you have to deal with it. Like we said earlier, we're acute actors. We have to work on these things. Having somebody you can call on that peer support network right away and say, Chief, this is just going on. Where do I start? Where do I go if I don't already have policies in place? And again, the last part of that is having some guidance through the best practices to help you build policies within your organization that will help you mitigate this incident should it come up. And I pray it doesn't, but we all know it does. So, but that all ties in. Every one of these things that we deal with in the mental health world transitions back to challenges with dependencies, whether it's your inside drugstore or the outside drugstore, right? So we can help you with that as well. If you say, I'm really having a problem with this guy, he comes into work our roll call's at 6 and he's historically here at 7, and the guys are saying this is going on, and they smell alcohol. Well, there's the thing behind the thing. Let's help figure out what that is. So, because as we talked, leading this back to our earlier discussion about recruitment and retention, we invest a hell of a lot of time and money in getting people to where we can keep them productive, and now we got to keep them for 32 years. So that's a huge investment that you just don't want to throw them away and try to put somebody back in there. You want to try to help them get some kind of rehabilitation, get them back on the job, and get them to be not only a productive member of your organization, but a productive member of society altogether. So it only helps us, them, their family, and everybody else. So that's really where we're at with the program. If you have any questions after this, I'll be here. That's really where we're at with that. And thanks for giving me the opportunity to give an update on that.
Yeah, thanks, Chief Shaw. Okay, so just to kind of stay on time here, I've gone through all the questions, at least for what has been submitted, but let's just go with some takeaways again, and then we'll wrap it up.
Well, I think, as we're talking about peer support and identifying people that are in need, we've got the peer support training programs that are going on around the state. So if you're a department that doesn't have a policy, you don't have peer support in there, you send people to those programs, and they walk away with from that program with a template that how you end up and establish and start a peer support either within your department or with other departments in your area, so that you begin to build some local resources before you need to reach out to either the State Ohio Professional Firefighters. And I will say, that the OAPFF, that they'll end up, and if you call them and talk to them, whether you're a volunteer organization, they'll reach out and help you in any part of the state. There's been a number of times that, I've had non-local fire chiefs with, no representation of a union call and say, we experienced this, where can I end up and get some peer support? And I'll call somebody, one of the guys from the Ohio Professional Firefighters, and say, hey, so-and-so township, they just experienced, an infant death, and their firefighters or their medics are having a real difficult time with it. Can you reach out to them? And they always do.
To add on to that, I think, strictly from the peer support side, peer support is not an event, it's a process. So I'm encouraging everybody in this audience, if you haven't taken the peer support class, we made sure that there's going to be some virtual classes so you can do it from your office. Try and get into that class, one of those classes, because I think it not only helps you to develop a program, but it helps you understand the program. Not that you're necessarily going to be out doing peer support work, but you need to understand the process of it. So having an event is certainly important, and we need to respond to that, and we do. But it's those little pickups when you start seeing that whoever showing up in a wrinkled uniform for the first time or starting to show up a little bit later, they're starting to have issues at home with their spouse or their children, or things fall apart, which happens in every organization, and everybody at times is going to go through some stuff. So having somebody there to understand, hey, wait a minute, there's something going on, you want to talk, and getting those conversations going is critical to keeping those folks as employees and friends and keeping them healthy and happy in their lives. But back to the marijuana briefly. I know that's what we're here to talk about. Making sure you have a strong policy is a key. If you don't have a strong policy, this is coming down the road. You know, this is a firestorm, if you will, coming at you. And having a strong policy and understanding, if you don't have contract language, at least make sure your policies are strong so that zero tolerance will protect you. And if that's not something you want and you think it's okay, I'm not advocating either way. I'm saying if it's a concern of yours, make sure your policy is strong and your processing of that policy is taken care of, and make sure your folks know it.
Yeah, I was going to say the same thing. You know, it's not a matter of if, it's when. You know, these things are going to happen. So the best time to prepare for that is before it happens. You know, make sure you're ready. You know, it's kind of like a crash policy. You don't want to be standing on the side of the road, somebody crashed your truck and say, okay, well, what do we do now? Same thing with all of this, whether it be marijuana or peer support. Like, before you have an employee that's in crisis, before you have an employee that tests positive, have everything in place so when it does happen, you'll know what to do and you won't be scurrying around trying to figure it out.
Just one more thing. Just, you know, this collaboration that we have with the Ohio Professional Firefighters, our goal is so that you have the same message that your firefighters have from their local, and that's why we went down this direction. So, if you saw a different message with your firefighters and you got from us, please let us know, because I think we can fix it. We've got a good relationship with John Harvey in that. So the message that your local has and the message you get from us should be the same. And you will see some publications that will come jointly from us and the Ohio Association of Professional Firefighters.
That's a great point, Jack. We've been talking a lot about the OAPFF. Just in case you don't know, is our board of directors, or your board of directors, met with the OAPFF's board of directors over the summer, and we sat down in a room and said, okay, what can we do to work together on stuff? There's certain things that we're just not going to agree on. Let's not talk about any of that. Let's talk about all the stuff we can agree on, and let's make the fire service for Ohio better. And they were on board 100%, and so were we. So it's exciting to be working with them. A great group of people.
Thank you for tuning in to the Triple P Podcast, Premier, Professional, and Proactive, brought to you by the Ohio Fire Chiefs Association. If you'd like to hear more, follow us on Spotify, Apple, Google, or wherever you get your podcast. And if you feel so inclined, please help us spread the word by telling your fire and EMS friends about this channel.